The Sandy and Toddcast is a MindgardenMedia podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. Another week, another Sandy and Toddcast. And of course, we are in the Bigfoot Chronicles, so it's another episode on Bigfoot.
I laugh every time we say the Bigfoot Chronicles. It sounds so official. But yes, we are deep into season 6 of the Sandy and Toddcast and concentrating the season on Bigfoot. And I'm having a blast so far because I'm learning a lot of stuff that I didn't know before.
And this episode is moving on. We're going to talk about evidence in this one. Season 6, Episode 3, The Bigfoot Chronicles continue. It's next on the Sandy and Toddcast.
Hey gang, we are Damon,
Sue, and Amy Lynn
from the Edward Park Paranormal Society.
Join us for each episode of the Apps Alchemy podcast as we take a deep dive into the world of the paranormal, cryptids, the occult, and more. We've seen, heard, and experienced almost everything, and now we're bringing it all to you.
Find us on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, and anywhere you might find your podcasts. Apps Alchemy Podcast is a MindgardenMedia production.
Broadcasting from two very different yet magical places not found on any map. Get ready to discuss the strange, weird, ghostly, crazy, spooky, and odd things that take place around us each and every day, all while having a little bit of fun. This is the Sandy and Toddcast.
Welcome back to the Sandy and Toddcast. She is Sandy.
He is Todd.
And we are talking Bigfoot.
Bigfoot, big feet.
On our last episode, we talked a little bit about like different theories, right? Isn't that what we talked about?
Yeah, kind of what is Bigfoot.
And our good friend Damon from Apps, Adirondack Park Paranormal Society, brought up the fact that like we were talking about grainy footage and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought up the fact, well, maybe it's not the footage that's necessarily grainy, but our interaction with whatever Bigfoot is, maybe that is the grainy thing. And I thought, boy, that's brilliant because, again, kind of like when you talk about ghosts and spirits and entities, you know, when they quote unquote are manifesting, there are reports of kind of seeing a little bit of a face or kind of seeing this, or you see the body shape. And right. I mean, how similar is that? It's very similar. It could very well be something like that.
Well, really quick story. A few years ago, I was doing an investigation. I'm sure I've talked about this before in previous seasons, but did an investigation at a restaurant. And I witnessed what I do believe to be the formation of an entity at the bottom of the stairs that we were standing. There were only a few of us who actually witnessed this, but it was fuzzy. It was kind of jittery and moving as we watched it try to form. It seemed to be female. You could make out sort of a shape, sort of from the knees to the neck area. And after Damon said that, it really reminded me of what I saw. And we do believe that to be an entity attempting to form. It was shaky. It was moving back and forth. There was no way we would have been able to get a really clear picture of this, even if we had attempted it.
Right.
And so that just triggered me. And I thought, you know, that is kind of brilliant if you think about it. And it also lends itself, Todd, to the idea of interdimensional beings,
right?
Shapeshifters, you know, that kind of thing. So it's definitely something to think about. Is it that our equipment isn't up to par, or is it that no matter what equipment we have, it would never be completely clear?
Right.
Sort of a different perspective on it. I thought it was really, really a great thing to think about. So kudos to Damon, and thank you, Damon, for bringing that point up.
That also made me think of something, and that was if you were out, let's say you and Damon were out and you were investigating to find Bigfoot. let's just say, and I just choose Damon because, I would never go on that trip. But let's say you and Damon are out and you're investigating, you're looking for Bigfoot, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden you see like a grainy Bigfoot. So then that led me to want to ask the question, would you walk into the grainy Bigfoot? Like you walked into the black mist that time? Would you do that? Because you felt safe enough to do it. Would you do it?
I might. You know me. We were watching Dave and I were watching this a special, the Jack Osbourne from a few years ago. He and his sister Kelly Osbourne were in this place in California in Los Angeles called Heritage Square that I'd really like to go to, by the way. And so Kelly was getting freaked out, and because she actually has some abilities somewhat similar to my abilities. And Cindy Kaza was on the show and she came in. And so I remember turning to Dave and saying to Dave, why do people get so scared? Like, I don't get scared. I get calm. When I'm in the middle of an investigation and things are happening, I just become incredibly calm. So it's funny that you said that, because I don't know. Maybe I would walk towards, fuzzy Bigfoot.
Yeah, you would.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure you would.
And
then he'd see you coming and totally run in the other direction. Oh my God, it's Sandy from the Sandy and Toddcast. I'm getting the fuck out of here.
Fuck out of here now. So yeah, it's funny, but I don't know. I've never been in that situation. I was listening in preparation for this episode. I was listening to some of the vocalizations and recordings that people have made. And there's a great website I'll talk about in a little while that you can go to actually hear them. I was trying to download them and you can't download them. But I was thinking about investigating, and listening to them sort of gives you a little bit of the chills when you listen to them, because your mind is automatically thinking to yourself, what is a natural explanation for this? Could it be an animal? Could it be a bird?
Right.
What could it be? And then once your brain gets to the point where you really aren't sure you can find something, it gets to be a little bit chilling. And I don't know how I would do in the middle of the night in the woods if I heard some of these sounds. So
yes, but I also think, again, that lends itself a lot to, quote unquote ghost hunting, where some of that stuff does happen. And it is kind of chilling when you first hear your first disembodied voice. You're like, well, who the hell just said that right in front of my face? But again, you're understanding what the situation is. So
sure.
All right, let's get into some of the evidence here.
All right. There's a lot of different types of evidence that have come forward over the years. We're just going to break them down, go over a few of them quickly, dig a little deeper into some of them. But there's different types. There's eyewitness accounts, footprints and hair or fur, recordings, different pictures, videos. So we'll kick it off with eyewitness accounts. According to Live Science, which is a website, there have been over 10,000 reported Bigfoot sightings in the continental United States. So we're not talking Hawaii, for example, or Puerto Rico. We're talking about in the continental United States. About 1/3 of all claims of Bigfoot sightings are located in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
So California, Oregon, Washington, up in that area. Other prominent areas of supposed sightings include the rural areas of the Great Lakes region and the southeastern United States. So now we're talking our neck of the woods, New York, Wisconsin, Ohio hears a lot of them, surrounding the water, which would obviously make sense. Canada gets a lot up surrounding the Great Lakes as well. So just a lot. It's interesting that you tend to hear a lot of sightings around water and or wooded areas. So, which makes sense. Any animal needs water or needs to be near water. So, and the rest you need for shelter and cover and, food. It's
kind of interesting when you think of those three locations in the United States, while they're very different, the Pacific Northwest, the Great Lakes, and also the Southwest and the Southeastern region of the United States. I'm sorry. I misunderstood that. So I thought it was the Southwest, because the Southwest, I always think of Arizona, New Mexico, that area. And that has a very interesting vibe of nature itself. You've got the mountains, you've got the desert, you've got the indigenous people who are very strong in that area still to this day.
That's
Pacific
right.
Northwest, very nature intensive. Great Lakes can be the same thing. Now I'm looking at it going, Southeastern, what does that have to do with, and it probably is the water part, because
it's probably the water and the swamps. So down in the Southeast, they have
down
what they
in
call,
Louisiana. You know that song?
No, I don't. It's like what was the Mexican radio song we went through a few seasons
I'm
ago?
on a Mexican radio. No, down in Louisiana. That's a song called Poke Salad Annie by Joe South, I think the guy's name is. And Elvis did a remake of it. And just,
you know who would know that? Dave. Dave would know that.
I want you to go up to Dave later on and say, down in Louisiana. Just say that and see what he says. Yes, he will.
I will. We'll report back next week because he'll know. But they call it the skunk ape down there. And it's a little bit, it's basically a Bigfoot, but a Bigfoot that's adapted itself to the swamp areas of, now I've been down in the swamps of Louisiana and Florida. I've been in the Everglades, and there is a lot of places that something like a skunk ape could be. And so they do get a lot of sightings down there. Swamps for cover and shelter and food, and then near the ocean, near the swamp areas for water. It makes perfect sense. Now, most reports are considered mistakes or hoaxes, even by those researchers who claim that Bigfoot exists. So it is kind of nice to see that the researchers who do believe in Bigfoot can still keep that analytic mind and say, okay, This is a hoax. This is a mistake. We're still looking for the true,
Again,
Bigfoot.
like true ghost hunters, same thing, right?
Exactly. And it's interesting how cryptozoology and paranormal investigating sort of run parallels to each other all the time. And I think that's super, super cool. And, you and I don't necessarily believe 100% every single thing there is in the paranormal world.
Right.
We have our own level of skepticism that we've discussed both on and off the show many, many times before. And so I think that's healthy. I consider myself to be a healthy skeptic. I don't just run in willy-nilly and believe, everything that somebody says. So I think that's really good. There is a website called woodape.com. And it's a place to not only report sightings, but of course to read all about those sightings. And real people, regular people like you and I, could go onto the site and submit our sightings and tell the stories. And sometimes they'll actually go out and investigate those stories with the people who report them. And it's fascinating. I was doing some research for this show and was reading through some of them, and they were pretty intriguing. Some of them were kind of silly, but a lot of them were very intriguing. I'll share a couple with you guys now. In March of 2000, an 18-year-old man observed one Bigfoot slowly jogging across Holson Valley Road in LaFleur County, Oklahoma. He described the creature as military brown in color, with long matted hair, heavy set, over 6 feet tall, a big fat head with kind of whiskers coming from his face. The witness's total time of observation was approximately only 10 seconds. The area is devoid of houses and is somewhat remote. The creature never looked in his direction and continued to jog uphill on 2 legs after crossing the road. He initially thought he was observing a bear, but the animal continued jogging across the road up a nearby hill on its legs like a man would. So first off, you say, 18 years old, it's a kid. But
drugs.
In the same drugs, come on, drinking, drug, whatever. But there have also been some other sightings in that area that kind of substantiate what he said. So that's interesting, too. When you have more than one story that sort of corroborates the other and the people don't really know each other, that's very interesting. The other one is really intriguing. May of 2021, so not that long ago, a woman and her husband in Taney County, Missouri, experienced something throwing rocks at their camper for several months, different periods over several months. They also heard several taps on the windows, and they heard footsteps that sounded like someone or something walking around it, so bipedal. They had been building a retirement cabin in the woods, and they were staying in the RV during the summer, and that's when all this went down. One night, as the woman was doing dishes, something tried to pull on her RV door, and open it. Then it started growling. So she decided to start going to work with her husband. Her husband worked from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. And she would sit in the car that whole time so that she didn't have to be alone. She was interviewed several times by different people, each time retelling the story exactly the same. And they believe her to be truthful. So, in other words, they believe that what she's saying, she truly believes happened. They can't prove that it happened in and of itself, but they believe that what she experienced is true, is something she truly experienced. So was it Bigfoot? Was it a bear? Was it another animal? I don't know, but it's quite an intriguing story because, again, if you go to woodape.com, they have a whole section of recordings that we'll talk a little bit more about, but you can hear similar things, rocks being thrown at houses, different things. Now, I don't know that bears necessarily can pick up rocks and throw them because everybody essentially immediately thinks about bears. But I don't know what could do that in the animal kingdom. But I think that's very interesting because you'd have to be able to have, like apes do, you'd have to be able to have, what do they call them? Prehensile, like fingers. They have to work together, not just a paw.
Yeah, unless they were using a digging motion and kind of, granny shotting it, kind of like a center on a football team. The other thing I thought of is a bear can certainly try to open up a door. We've seen stories of California where they get into people's houses and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. We actually have an area that I want to take you next year, Old Forge, which is way up in the Adirondack Mountains, and we've stayed several times at a campground where bears are a normal thing. And they tell you, don't do this, don't do that, don't leave food here, don't leave food there, because bears will actually try to get into cabins. And, they will, if they think there's food, they will get into your car, they will get into your cabin, they will get into your RV. So it's everywhere. When you drive through town, everybody has their garbage locked in. It looks like Fort Knox, because it's all so that the bears can't get to it. So interesting thoughts on this story. I don't know what it is, but I'll tell you what, if she was scared enough that for months at a time, she would go sit in a car by herself for 8 hours every night while her husband worked because she didn't want to be alone in her own home. That's scary.
It is scary, but here's the other thing. It's 2021, and, it happened in May of 2021. At that point, if this is really going on, go out and buy some cheap, cameras.
Yeah.
You can do like trail cameras and stuff like that for not that expensive.
Yeah,
throw a couple outside your trailer or whatever and just see what the hell's going on.
That's true.
Know?
I know.
It's not like we're talking 1973 and there was nothing they could do about it. I mean, they had a Brownie camera from Kodak or something like that. I get that. But 2021, there were things that they could have done to, I'm not saying prove that there's Bigfoot, but just find out what the fuck is going on around their RV.
Yeah. I don't even think she necessarily was thinking it. She just didn't know what it was, and it was terrifying her. I have a friend, Chad, he's a hunter, and he has land, and he has trail cam, probably several set up on his land, and he's always posting pictures, and the pictures are really good. Like pictures of deer and pictures of coyotes and pictures of this and
they're
that.
good. I mean, you and I have both seen pictures of like, well, what was that? Could that have been a spirit, a ghost or something? Well, it could have been,
Exactly. So who knows? I think the eyewitness accounts are really interesting, and it's fun to kind of analyze them a little bit and think, what would I do in my situation? And in a few episodes, we're going to talk about some interesting stories we're going to dig a little more into some of the eyewitness accounts. So footprints and hair or fur. Bigfoot was put in the spotlight in 1958 before the big famous film, when news media picked up a story about Ray Wallace, a road contractor working in Northern California who made plaster casts of giant footprints that he found near his work site. Hundreds of similar footprints, and a few, believe it or not, handprints have now been reported over the years. Some were clearly made by bears. Some are fraudulent. Actually, one of Ray Wallace's relatives later found carved wooden feet matching some of the footprint casts. And many others to this day remain unexplained. And I was looking at some pictures of not just the casts, but of footprints that people have taken pictures of. And some of them are kind of interesting to look at. I can't, my jury's kind of out on the footprints thing, but I just do think it's interesting. I mean, we all leave footprints, boot prints, shoe prints. So is it possible? Of course it is, but it's hard to tell what's real and what's not. So I don't know how they can possibly prove or disprove casts of footprints.
Listen, I've watched Columbo, and I've watched Matlock, and I've watched Murder, She Wrote. And those people can look at, dusty boot prints and figure out who killed the other person kind of thing. So if Columbo, with one bad eye and smoking cigars every day of his life, can figure out who was a killer, we can figure out if these footprints are real or not.
Well, hopefully Bigfoot would be wearing like a pair of Nikes, because that would make it so much easier to track it and figure it out.
And here's the thing. I don't think he's a Nike wearer, because if you look at him, he's all matted and shit. He probably wears like cheap, knockoff kind of shoes.
Yeah. Probably, the 1099 specials. Wherever
he was a big Kmart shopper back in the day.
There was.
Probably bought all of his wigs there in the wig aisle.
I miss it.
Yeah.
So, even handprints were found. There was an alleged Bigfoot handprint found by Ivan Marks north of Colville, Washington in 1970. It was 12.7 inches in
length. Okay.
Yeah. So very interesting. People have reported to find fur and hair also, but any testing has either proven it to be a known animal or is inconclusive. I always kind of tend to pay more attention to inconclusive.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if the scientists can't pick it out, pick an animal out, then
an animal or synthetic, if they can't say it's synthetic and fake, right?
Like, what the heck is it then? You know? So even though a lot of stuff does get disproven, there is a lot of stuff that nobody can prove. So sometimes that speaks just as much as the stuff that gets disproven.
And again, just like, investigating paranormal, if you can somehow come up with a theory of how it happened, you got to kind of throw it out. But if you keep asking the question, you can't quite explain it away. That's when the light bulb goes on, and you have to say to yourself, well, that could be something,
Well, exactly. And just a quick example from not too long ago, Dave and I went to one of my favorite cemeteries that I'm just so incredibly drawn to. And we had my K2 meter with me. And it was not going off in certain places, and it was going off in certain places. Now, I feel this cemetery, Oakwood in Syracuse, is probably the most active cemetery I have ever been at. And I don't take that lightly, because Bachelor's Grove for me was an incredibly active cemetery. But also, Bachelor's Grove to me was more of just an extreme sadness and a heaviness there. But Oakwood is very, very different. Oakwood is very intelligent from what I'm gathering from my experiences there. And so at one point we were at two different spots in the cemetery. And at one point we were having what I believe to be an intelligent conversation with a family, an entire family right by their crypt. But to your point, yes, right now, I can't say 100% that I had an intelligent conversation with members of this family. However, when you look at what it couldn't be, the first thing you always want to do, whether it's Bigfoot, whether it's paranormal, is you want to think of all the things that it couldn't be. You want to find out. So in other words, it was on my lap. It wasn't near anything electronic that would set the K2 meter off. Then you want to say, okay, well, it wasn't doing it 100 yards away. Why is it doing it here in this specific spot? You wouldn't say, okay, it's lighting up indiscriminately. You would say, is it lighting up indiscriminately, or is it seem to be responding to the questions that I asked? So you're taking it apart and you're analyzing it. You're looking at the beauty of the moment, but you're also analyzing it at the same time. And I think that that's what's important in the whole Bigfoot idea is, for fur and hair, you're saying, okay, well, it's not a deer. It's not a bear. It's not. So what is it? Then you take it from there. And so it's so important to really have an analytical perspective on things and take it apart and really think about it and not just believe, oh yeah, there's such a thing as Bigfoot, you know? And so I just think that's very interesting that there is still some stuff that we just can't explain away. Do I 100% think I spoke to this family? I 90% believe that I spoke with this family.
Right.
But 10% of me says there are still possibilities of something else there in the air. I don't know what it could be in the air. I don't know. But you always have to be healthy in your skepticism and say, okay, I admit that there could be something else there. So I think whether you believe in Bigfoot or you don't believe in Bigfoot, it's so important to have that mindset of, well, I don't believe in Bigfoot, but maybe I believe that there's a little possibility. Or I believe in Bigfoot 100%, but by the same token, it could be something else.
Right.
You know, that's just, I think, a healthy way of looking at any of these things. And the last thing I want to talk about is DNA and water, because I did not know that this existed until, and I don't watch many Bigfoot. I admittedly don't watch many Bigfoot shows because I think it's just most of the time a lot of people stomping around in the forest and you never see a Bigfoot. You never get anything because if we did, it would be the biggest news in the world.
Yeah, but you know what? You could say the same thing about most ghost shows. Most of it is, was that a whisper? What was that sound? Something moved. But and there's a light going off and there's a buzzer going off, but there's never a ghost that comes up and goes, hello, you're looking for me. Same thing.
Although I have to say, I was watching Ghost Brothers Lights Out again last night, and their comic relief is just great. It's just great. And I just love that show. I think they are so funny. So, but what scientists on one show that I was watching, I think it was Finding Bigfoot, but I'm not sure. One show that the researchers took water samples because when an animal goes through water, it can actually take their DNA.
Ah, that's interesting.
I did not know this. So what they would do is take water samples out in the forest and then check the DNA. So they'd say, okay, this was a deer. This was an otter. This was a bear. This was this. This was that. And I thought that was very fascinating that they do have the ability to do that. Now, I haven't heard where they found anything inconclusive at this point, but I only just watched that show. But I did think that was pretty interesting. So just some food for thought. Recordings. Recordings are huge. People have recorded whistles, knocks, whoops, growls, rock tapping, grunts, howls. You can go to woodape.com for a full page of recordings. And like I said, some of them are so cool. Some of them a little bit eerie. So it's very interesting to listen to some of these. I was hoping to download it, but it wouldn't let me. And I couldn't find any good recordings on YouTube or on the internet to be able to share with everybody. But we will go over a really interesting case in a few weeks. It was featured in Missing 411, The Hunted. And I just am in love with this documentary because I think it's very well done and so interesting. So we'll talk about that in a few weeks. Pictures, we kind of talked about them at the beginning of the episode, usually grainy. Most that I've seen were probably either inconclusive or obvious hoaxes. There hasn't been anything in my world that was too intriguing. And lastly, let's talk about videos, because videos tend to be something that gets passed around social media quite often, makes the news sometimes, and most often than not, they're, again, grainy or ridiculous, make no sense. The most famous is the Patterson-Gimlin film. It was shot by Roger Patterson, who died in 1972 from cancer, and Bob Gimlin, who himself is still alive today. The footage was shot in 1967 in Northern California along Bluff Creek, about 38 miles south of Oregon, and has since been subjected to many attempts to authenticate or debunk it. For decades, the exact location of the site was actually lost. They couldn't find it, mostly because of regrowth of foliage in the stream bed after there was a big flood in 1964. And so after that, it kind of took on its own life again. But it was they did find the site again in 2011. So Patterson, on his deathbed, claimed that the footage was real. Even up to his deathbed, he claimed the footage was real. I'm going to play a few minutes of audio for you now from an interview I found with Bob Gimlin from 2018. Now, he didn't give many interviews until about 2005. So from 1970 to 2005, didn't say much at all about this. Of course, back then, there was a lot less notoriety. There were no real Bigfoot shows other than In Search Of.
And no social media and all the different places that, video and media can be put out. It was either you got on TV or you didn't.
Exactly. And I think, or in magazines or whatever, what have you. And I think that with the dawning of all of the social media and the internet and all of that, I think he kind of decided it was time to start speaking out because people have become a bit less skeptical in recent years and were a little bit more willing to hear his side of the story. So you can find the link to the full interview in the show notes this week. It's like 20 minutes, but it's so interesting, and it really tells a lot of the story. Let's listen to it now. It's just a few minutes, and I kind of put it together with the In Search Of theme because I'm a goofball like that, and I love In Search Of. So let's listen to it now.
I'm Bob Gimlin. Yes, I was backing Roger Patterson up all the time. While he had the camera up, working with it, I was riding back of him. It was a Saturday, sunshiny, bright fall day, October 20th. And it was just a warm, sunshiny day, and we were just riding up alongside the creek on the east side of the creek. And about 4 miles from where we were camped, Roger was just riding. Roger was riding in front of me. I was leading the little pack horse. We were basically going out to camp about 40 miles further out than we'd been riding. We'd been riding, making big circles every day. All at once, when we come around a bend in the creek, there one stood across the creek from us. And of course, Roger's horse just went berserk. Well, mine did too, but I was able to stay on him. And so Roger had the camera up to his eye, of course, and he kind of stumbled and fell down on his elbows. And he wasn't really sure if he got sand or whatever in the camera, because this is all happening really, really fast and excited.
Had you guys gone up there looking for Bigfoot?
Yes, trying to find more evidence. We were called down there, 3 different size of footprints around a piece of equipment. I'll never forget that few seconds that I did get to see her. It'll be with me the rest of my life. And so I feel like that I was pretty much, well, I won't say I was blessed, really blessed, but however reason or why the reason that I got to be the one that witnessed her, that I'm still alive, makes me feel really good. I was kind of down the middle of the road. There were so many testimonials that Roger played to me about different folks that had seen them and witnessed tree knocks and tree bent limbs and stuff, and that I was kind of on the idea that, yeah, there probably is something. That's why I went down to see these footprints. That's why I did all the work that I did to get down there to see the footprints, and then they were all disturbed and ruined. And that's the other reason why we decided to stay and ride and look for more evidence. I say, well, think whatever you want to think. I know what I saw, and if you've seen the film footage, analyze it and think about it. And don't tell me that they can't exist, and because there's so many people out in the woods all the time that would see one. I said, don't even talk to me about that. I said, just think about what you're saying, and if you don't, then that's your ball game. You can think. I said, I'm not out here to prove to anybody that they exist at all. I said, I know they exist.
I just like the fact that in just a few words at the very end of that, he pretty much sums it up. Like, think what you want to think. You can take the footage of it and you can pull it apart and you can rip it apart and say these things aren't real. But I know what I experienced, and so be it. And it's just like going out and investigating. I can't throw enough in front of you to make anybody who doesn't want to open their mind to anything other than what we think is around us on a day-to-day basis. I'm not going to change your mind unless you have the experience yourself.
Right.
So
exactly.
Continue to feel how you feel. I just feel differently about it. It's
interesting, that's a great point, because there are so many things that I've experienced over. We could say that about psychics and mediums and empaths and paranormal investigators and anything. Like, there's so many things that I've experienced in my life that I can't possibly, even you who understands me, or Dave who understands me, I can't even 100% impress upon you my emotions, my feelings, the things that I saw, the things that I experienced, because you weren't there.
Or it's your experience. If we went to see Ed Gein's grave and you put your hands on Mama Gein's grave, right? Yeah. I basically did the same thing. You told me what you felt. I either had to believe that there's a possibility that what you were telling me was really going on, or I could say, she's full of shit. Right. Right.
And that's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay, but he's saying, though.
Right. It's okay. But at some point, I think all of us need to open our minds a little bit. Right. So when somebody says to me about anything, I just don't believe that to be the case. Okay, well, that's your belief. I understand that. Right. But also try and look at it from another perspective. We could take that to politics if we wanted to.
Oh, yeah.
And we won't, but because we're talking about Bigfoot, which is much more important than politics.
I agree.
But yeah, I just like the way he wrapped that up. And that sounds like it could be a nice 20-minute listen if somebody has time.
Oh, it was so really cool. It was really cool. And you also get to see his mannerisms, because a lot of times it really takes being able to see and hear to get a full picture of someone. And I really was just fascinated by watching him. My impression of Bob Gimlin is this man is, again, like story of the lady who was in the RV. He truly believes what he saw and what he experienced. Now, there will be people out there who say, well, that's great, but it probably was this or it was that. But this man truly believes that this is what he experienced. And you have to put a lot of belief in that belief that he has. You have to. I could tell you some of my, not you, but I could tell everybody some of my experiences, and you'd say, well, that sounds crazy, but I experienced it. Right. And I know what happened. And so was it a hoax? Bob has said over the years that if it was a hoax, and he truly believes it wasn't because he was there, that he had nothing to do with it, that it would have been Roger.
I was going to ask you. So, Bob feels like he really did witness something. And I thought it was interesting that he was calling it a her to start with.
Yes. And it gets a little bit more into that. And I also, in researching the film, realized that when you look at this film, you can see boobs. You can literally see. That's why it's been analyzed as being female. And his interview gets into that. They believe there was actually a family in the vicinity, and that the family is what made the footprints that had disappeared. That had been, people tramping through there and everything. it was like a holiday weekend previously, and people were up there hiking and stuff. And so by the time they got up there, the footprints were gone. But they do believe that it was a family, and that she may have been actually, because when she was walking, she was going at a pretty decent pace for what they believed her to be, but not running away.
Right.
And they believe that she may have been kind of decoying herself to get them away from
the family.
The family, and doing that, or going towards the family. So they're not 100% sure, but that's just the theories surrounding this film, because it truly was. You can see that this was a female.
So here's, and my question was going to be, maybe this guy, maybe Bob went to this location and he got scammed. Maybe the other guy scammed him into believing it or whatever. But
well, it's interesting. Now, there are some actual inconsistencies in the stories over the years. Now, does that mean that it was a hoax? Not necessarily. It might mean that memories change a little. This changes, that changes. The way you tell a story to one person may be different to another person.
Something can happen to me yesterday, and the story's a little different today, just because that's the way it is. My mind will take something and analyze it and put some different scenarios into it.
Yes.
Sometimes that happens with me. And so like when I am investigating, I have to be very careful that I don't add my thought process into the story that I'm telling.
Right. So and don't forget also that it was literally being told from two different perspectives.
Right.
There was Roger's perspective down off the horse on the ground and what he saw. And then Bob on his horse, 6 feet up, looking from that perspective. And so naturally, Bob at one point thought that looking down on her, that she was a certain height, but then realized from the film, Roger's advantage point, that she was actually much taller than she was.
Right.
So you have to take a lot of that into account. One interesting thing is that Patterson did immediately when they got back to town, called a lot of news outlets pretty quickly. Does that necessarily mean it was a hoax? Not at all. When you find something like this, he's got a film to back him up.
Listen, and in today's day and age, what would you do? It would be on social media immediately, right?
Exactly.
You would take the video that you just caught of Bigfoot, and it would be on Instagram, it would be on Facebook, Twitter, all over the place.
And one other point before we wrap up that I thought was interesting, we talked about this in the first episode of the season, is that this was in 1967. In 1968, the movie The Planet of the Apes came out. And I had never watched really The Planet of the Apes. I knew what it was. So I went and I watched some of it. And that movie won tons of makeup and costume awards in 1968 for essentially Bigfoot. I mean, it was apes. It was Planet of the Apes. And if you look at this film, I mean, if you really look at the Patterson-Gimlin film, there is absolutely no way that someone was wearing, if that was the best they could do in 1968, a year later, there is no way that someone was wearing an ape suit, a gorilla suit, the year before.
That looks so much better.
That looks so much better.
That looked real, right? Yeah.
There's no way. And this movie actually won awards for their costuming and stuff.
Because back in the day, that was big stuff. And I remember that movie, and it creeped me out, not because I thought it could be real, but because of how horrible the makeup was. Like they were talking and their mouths weren't moving on the outside, but they were moving underneath it was just freaky.
And they were nodding their heads. It was very weird. And this is a completely different film than what you saw in The Planet of the and there's some really good, I highly suggest you go, because I went down the rabbit hole and I went on YouTube and I looked at some of the people analyzing the videos, the Patterson film.
Yep.
And some really good points were made. I mean, if you look at, these things are huge. And if you look at, you can see in the film, the areas where when her arms would swing, you can actually see the hair worn away in the pattern of where the arms would swing.
Yes, I see that. I can see that.
Know?
I mean, I'm actually looking at that picture right now. I've got it up on my screen.
It's just, I mean, when they talk about things like that, it may not be something that's obvious to you at a first glance, but then when they break it down like that, that gives you a little reason to pause and say, let me think about this a little more.
If it is a female, and you said it had breasts, and from what I can see, it does look like it maybe does have a bosom. Yes. She was thick. She was a thick baby. I can tell you that much. She had a big old booty. And, the other thing to think about on that is the length of the arms.
Yes.
If she was standing up straight, those arms are well lower than her waist. And I mean, they're down there when you're right, when she's swinging them arms,
there's going to be fur rubbed off in those areas, like in the hip areas and stuff. I mean, I never even thought about that till I watched one of those analytics films on YouTube. And it's very interesting. Like, I don't know. I think what I'll do is I'll put a still picture from Planet of the Apes up with a still picture.
Okay. I think that's a good idea.
So that people can see what we're talking about. And the difference is like ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So to think that some guy in 1967 went up there in a gorilla suit that was like 7'5" tall and could walk like that and look like that and have it flow that way. I don't know. It's just kind of crazy. It's really crazy.
Looks to me like they would have done fine during COVID, because it looks like the hair. The only thing you really see are the area around the eyes, and the nose kind of protrudes, but there's hair. It looks like there's hair around the mouth area, unless I'm seeing it wrong. Yeah.
And then one of the analytics was talking about like how it has somewhat the gradient of like a gorilla.
Yes.
But yet there are other parts of it that don't match a gorilla, which is interesting.
Right. Right.
So I don't know, but I never gave a lot of thought to it over the years.
If that's a frickin' gorilla, that's a huge frickin' gorilla.
Exactly. I've never seen a gorilla. And gorillas don't always walk bipedally all the time.
They're usually hunched over, kind of using their arms to kind of move along. Yeah.
Or they're sitting. So I don't know. But I think it's pretty insane. If you actually watch this video, it's pretty darn insane. The whole video was, I think, about 56 seconds long. It's just fascinating. The more I learn about it, the more fascinated I become with it. So interesting stuff. Nobody even knows where the original copy of the film is today. They've thought they've tracked it down several times over the years, but they haven't. Nobody knows where it is. And interestingly enough, scientists have really not shown very much interest in it over the years. They've just sort of disregarded it or not wanted to get involved in the controversy.
Well, that's the thing, I think. And I'm kind of surprised, and this throws a little bit of personal, I guess, thought process into it, but I'm surprised with technology that we have today that they haven't gone in to try and clean up the footage.
They have.
They have. Okay. I've not seen it.
Yes, there are some versions of it. I might put a link in there, too. There are some versions that I watched that they actually kind of made it more like HD, and they kind of enhanced it a little bit more because it was shot with I can't think of the name of the cameras.
Is it 8 millimeter?
Yeah, sort of like that kind of idea. So they reminded me of like Dave's family videos from the 50s and 60s.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, that kind of thing that we had remastered. So there are.
Sorry, I was actually watching it there for a second. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. There are versions of it that are more cleaned up, and it makes sort of the breasts more obvious and the spots that are worn away in her body a little bit more, but it does definitely look like a female to me. So who knows? She may have been trying to get them away from her family or actually going to her family. We'll never know, but it's very intriguing and interesting.
Well, I have to say, in one fell swoop, you actually made me interested in this topic because until today, I was like, Bigfoot, a hairy monster roaming the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
But this, I'm kind of intrigued by it. So thank you.
It's kind of fun to, there are some people who say they hope we never figure it out. because it's interesting and it's kind of fun to hypothesize and, pick your theory. But I do not think it's a giant ground sloth. Other than that, I'm pretty much open to anything. So
except Planet of the Apes. Okay.
So next week, we're going to talk a little bit about Bigfoot in our respective states, Wisconsin and New York. So that should be kind of interesting. The next couple of weeks, we'll take a couple episodes to talk about that.
All right, let's get to our spiel really quick.
You can find the Sandy and Toddcast on any of the platforms that you normally find your podcasts, including YouTube and Twitter. Be sure to like the Sandy and Toddcast on Facebook to keep up on the latest goings-on, including each week's episode. You can also join our group, Stay Weirdos Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast, for more fun. Stay Weirdos is a safe place to share your thoughts, feelings, ideas, and random inappropriate memes without judgment. Sandy and Todd also have a podcast called The Empathicary Podcast. It's for empaths, by empaths. And if you know an empath, you might want to listen too. Find and like the page on Facebook. And finally, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast and just aren't sure where to start, Sandy and Todd can also help with that too. MindgardenMedia is their latest project where the dynamic duo can guide you every step of the way in your podcasting journey. Editing, producing and consulting is what they do. Like Mindgarden Media on Facebook or email them at themindgardenmedia@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for staying weird.
And I probably talked too much on this one because we went a little long on this one, but I actually was interested in it and had some thoughts on it too. So,
well, I talk too much anyway. So,
and time. Remember that from one of the early ones.
I love you.
Bye.
We love you guys. Bye.